I think that the effort here is to moderate the stance towards the region and try to build bridges rather than destroy them. We've seen the tone in Saudi Arabia, or Trump's tone in Saudi Arabia, as a lot more moderate. I think that the effort here is to also emphasize the same thing in Israel. Broadly, it's to bring to bring more peace to the region, to secure the allies, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and to ensure that Trump really shows a different face to his relationship, to his view on the region as a whole.
So let's talk about as we look at the images there, and we'll apologize to our viewers. We're getting these shots that are coming into us from different feeds from the region, and so occasionally there might be a technical glitch there. But Ayman, give us a sense of the history of the wall. Obviously, it has actually many names. It's called the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall. It's it's the holiest site in Judaism because it is believed to be the western exterior of the temple built by Herod, the site of Solomon's temple, but it's also a holy site to Muslims because it's believed that that is also the site where the Prophet Muhammad was tethered to his steed on his way to heaven. So just give us a sense of how history has shaped this wall.
So I think it's the wall, it's the city as a whole. Jerusalem is a city that is shared by Muslims, by Jews, and by Christians as well. A lot of symbolism there to all the religions. I think Trump is trying to walk a very thin line and trying to appease a lot of different parties that are looking this from very different perspectives. The effort, I think, here is to demonstrate solidarity, but try not to really embrace any form of controversy here. The visit in general to the Middle East, to Israel, to Saudi Arabia is about limiting controversy. Very difficult to do with the visit to Jerusalem, a very really sensitive issue for the Palestinians, for the Arabs, and for the Israelis as well.
So what do you believe the overall goal of this three-day trip is? There's been a lot of talk, of course, about brokering a peace deal. He's called it the ultimate deal. But clearly, at least when you listen to some of the speeches that we've heard and some of the remarks, even the remarks this morning, though peace was touched on, it does not seem to be the primary focus of many of these public remarks. So what do you think the main goal is for President Trump?
So I think the main goal, this is very much a charm offensive to reassure the traditional allies that the U.S. has had in the region for decades, be it the Israelis, the Egyptians, or the Saudis. It's an effort to rebuild bridges, reinvigorate the relationship, and really to steer away from Obama's policy to say that the U.S. is going to take sides in the region, it's going to be more anti-Iran, it's going to fight the Islamic State, but it's also going to back allies, be it Saudi Arabia or Israel in this fight. The emphasis, I think, on a new peace accord is not correct. I think that Trump is trying to ease tensions maybe on that level, but we're nowhere near close to any form of Arab-Israeli agreement that would resolve the conflict. This is very much still at a very rhetorical level, nothing in detail.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I was based in Jerusalem for quite some time back in the summer of 2013, and at that time, the former Secretary of State John Kerry was making a real concerted push to try and bring both parties to the bargaining table, to the negotiating table, and ultimately those talks failed. Is it your sense, is there a sense of optimism now with this new administration, or is this a lot of window dressing and the issues that have dominated the region for over 70 years will continue to dominate, and it's going to be very, very difficult beyond the very nice photo op of the president visiting?
Well, I think just resolving the conflict is going to be very, very challenging. This is not just about a few statements here and there or easing tensions. Structurally, all U.S. presidents have tried to resolve this conflict. It's much more difficult to do so today given the realities on the ground. And the parties either in Palestine or either in Israel, both the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli Authority are not close to any form of a peace agreement. So I think that Trump's objective here is not actually to deliver on a deal. There's a certain gravitas to the conflict that each U.S. president wants to resolve it and find a peace agreement. I think it will prove equally challenging for President Trump.
You know, it's interesting. The president, in delivering some remarks in Saudi Arabia, pointed out that the Iran deal has, in his words, brought some of the other countries in the region closer to Israel. And I wonder what your thought is on that, because on one hand, certainly those countries that are Sunni majority probably want nothing to do with the Shia-dominated Iran, but part of the controversy has always been that many of these countries, with the exception of a few, do not even recognize the right of Israel to exist.
Well, absolutely. I think that's perfectly correct. We are in a difficult situation where the official position is really very different from what we see happening behind closed doors. There's certainly a feeling in some of the Gulf capitals that Iran is a challenge, or is the main challenge for their security, and that puts them in alignment with Israel on this issue. So there is probably intelligence sharing behind closed doors, a feeling that Iran should be confronted, or its influence in the region should be curtailed. That's very different from approaching it or thinking about the relationship in very broad terms, or in terms of building official diplomatic relations between Israel and the Arab states. I think the current structure, where there's some relationship behind closed doors or covert relationship, is probably preferable for some of these countries. Coming out and establishing diplomatic relations is very controversial in the Middle East. I don't think that we're even close to that at this stage.
Now, Ayham, you're very familiar with the Middle East, and maybe, Vlad, you can also chime in too. Twice we sort of talked about the public face and the private face. We talked about how along the campaign trail, President Trump was very pro-Israel. Since then, we've seen him sort of shift in certain ways about settlements, about moving the embassy, and then we've had this, if you want to call it a faux pas, revealing information to the Russians that was obtained by the Israelis. Though we've never heard Israel publicly condemn Donald Trump in any way. And now, you know, you talk a little bit about what sort of backroom conversations some of the other Arab nations may be willing to have, that they wouldn't be able to have, or wouldn't be able to make a public statement about whether or not there are alliances or agreements in sort of who's the enemy here. I'm wondering, Ayham and Vlad, you know, how complicated is the Middle East, and how influential are those sort of backroom deals versus what you see, what the public face may be? Do you get what I'm asking, guys?
Yes. Yeah.
In terms of the culture?
Sure. I think that you have two levels here of a relationship. The public in the Middle East is really in a different place in terms of viewing where the conflicts are, viewing where relationships are, especially with Israel. But I think that the leadership is at some level more pragmatic. So we've seen a lot of backroom deals or understandings between some of these states on security affairs, either directly or indirectly. Really a recognition of realities on the ground, and that sort of pragmatism is not necessarily counterproductive. The challenge over the long term is finding a treaty or a peace accord that can satisfy all sides. It's very difficult for the Arab governments in the Gulf to establish formal relationships absent peace agreements. So I think that's sort of the complication that we're seeing. In terms of the leagues, I think all of the leaders in the Middle East are eager to just cooperate with Trump regardless. They see this as an opportunity. The Saudi foreign minister called it a turning point. It really very much is. It's a U.S. administration that's re-embracing Saudi Arabia despite years of tensions over either security alliances or the issue of radical extremism or Islamic jihadist thought. So really an opportunity for the U.S. and Saudi to rebuild relations.
Yeah, and as Ayham is saying, I mean, there's many things that go on behind the scenes, including, believe it or not, some people may find this surprising, but there are negotiations that happen, for example, between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, where they do talk behind closed doors about security issues, about intelligence, but then there is the public face, which is always very difficult to navigate, and it's the same with some of these Sunni majority countries. For example, the president was just in Saudi Saudi Arabia. Many people wondered if human rights abuses was going to be a topic of conversation. They say that it really wasn't the focus of the conversation, but who knows what went on behind the scenes. And you're always navigating these sort of tricky sort of roadblocks and challenges in the region. It's something that is very fascinating. If anybody ever gets a chance to go out to the region, you will see all of those different competing factions and those competing interests, as well as the breathtaking history of the region, and you'll sort of get an insight into why it is the way that it is.
Right.
Ayham, Kamel, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your insight and analysis.
Thank you so much.